because Melbourne as we know it, or Boonwurrung, the country, was the largest wetland in Australia, Melbourne, and how they changed the courses. So there is those blockages that the natural water course will run. And I think that's what we've got to understand, how the billabongs and the lagoons and all connected up with the waterways of the major water that we know as the Yarra or the Boonwurrung, was all this changing of the water course, but it also changed the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri impact on the hunting. If you follow that, it also floods down along what we know as St Kilda Road, goes along there and you'll see the tree, which is about 700 years old. It's the river red gum. It's the last standing reminder, which then the river course flowed out and connected up to that bay we now know as Port Phillip Bay. But sometimes you can look out to that amazing bay at Nurram and see the fresh water still working its way through the seawater. That's about a balance of life. You're looking at different stages in time, because when the settlers came in, they blew out the natural water course at the waterfall at where we know is located at Queen's Bridge, where the fresh water used to run through down into the bay, and then they changed the turning basin where the early immigration used to occur. Ilk is eel. Ilk goes on this amazing journey, and it has to find its water course. And sometimes under the Melbourne University, when there's big floods coming through there, you can see the eels doing their natural run. So we tried to map that course of the eel from under Melbourne University in those drains right down through to Elizabeth Street. Some go to Gippsland and then they birth, and the children follow the same pattern of the watercourse for their long journey to another part of our world and come back. The eel traps were something that the mastery came from down what we know as Binbudge, which is Wurundjeri country, which is another nation down near Portland in the Western District, and then that's made up of other groupings of people. But there was this trade route. People talk about songlines and storylines, and it was about food trade. And that tells me about enterprises. And it also talks about the great engineering feat of the Mara people in their watercourse and channeling the floods down in that region, and also creating stone houses, which is another amazing engineering feat of the people of that region. That says something. It says there was a bit more permanent settlement. And these are the things that people need to understand. But it was also understanding the trade route and how we got to dine on different delicacies, the smoked. It's about understanding that, understanding the natural fish traps that in our river ways as well. And there's not enough research being done on those eel journeys, whether they've come down through the Yarra and what people were doing with eels and other fishes, but were travelling down our beautiful Boonwurrung, or the Yarra as people know it today. And it is about the transport, it's about the lifeblood of the Kulin Nation, and how everything flowed into our Great Bay, Nurram. So if you think about the people of the Kulin and how they connected through the river courses and the ways that we harness water for our survival, but it was also the trade route, it was also about families living along those riverways. My life was about my living on a riverway, in my grandmother's country, which is Wurundjeri, what everybody thought that was just Swan Hill and the Murray. But it really connected into the Edwards River and then the Murrumbidgee. So everything is what runs off, and then you've got the Darling River, the Barkindji, or the Barker, the people of the river. So it's understanding how people saw themselves within that, in the waterways, and how they connect. You teach the young girls about birthing cycles. They're transitioning to womanhood. So they all went on this journey. The Kulin went on this journey down to a place called Mama. It's a woman's place. So it was about why the sealers, and I'm a product of a sealer, because they captured these women. They didn't bring women in the early sealing days. So they took the women and they took them to Gun Carriage Island, across the waterways to Tasmania, to Gun Carriage Island and Preservation Island. And then it was that movement back that the women, the two women, my great-grandmother and her aunt, with the husband, John Briggs, who was a Tasmanian Aboriginal from Manalagenna, Watermotiena, came back and then moved, because I could map them about the gold rush period. But they're on a river course. Then they're at Ebenezer. There's another sort of river course there. And then you start to see they then move up to Corranderk. And then because of the Half-Caste Act, they then were transported to Maloga, which is up on the Echuca on the Murray, and then across to Cumragunja, still on the Murray River. And then my grandfather then marries a lady from Moonakulla Mission, the Neliquin. So everybody was moving in and out, at keeping the marriage lines going, but how my still connecting to part of that river. And it's very important, because a person from Frandlingham Mission goes up to Cumragunja and then marries one of my grandfather's sisters, and then takes her back, and then creates another part of the family history down in the Western District. So there's the influences, and then my aunties then marry other family members from other places that connect them to the river at Robinvale, and then up to Mildura, and then across to the Darling River. So how that all works in, and how it all works into the Murrumbidgee, because some of my family were there. So it's an amazing diaspora, but it's the life of the river. It's our lifeblood. I was privileged to be at a time when Aunty Connie Hart, and she was at Connie Albert's, and how we were weaving. It's her weaving, and how I was gathering stories of listening, just listening to her stories, and how I fitted in her family structure. And because at that stage didn't quite make sense, but it does now, because Aunty Connie was able to, with her gathering of the grasses and the weaving of those grasses, and how she was able to witness her mothers and her aunties creating these eel traps, that I was starting to weave her stories into my stories. And it's the journey of the waterways and food sources, and well, it is our lifeblood. We think about ourselves as the body of the land, so it's creating those imagery that makes sense to our being, and you start to make sense of your world, because it's about the waterways. And even if you think it on a world scale, Earth is just water's more water than there is Earth. So yeah, you're a part of that water, that running and connection to places. and the changing of the watercourse of the Boonwurrung. And can you imagine, water reclaims itself. Water will always reclaim itself and remind us. Man can't keep changing her direction. I think the early settlers didn't value the power of women and what women owned and controlled. Not owned as material, but I think they didn't understand the knowledge that they held, or we would never have survived. And that's what my search was. And going and up on the Murray River and sitting with Aunty M and old Granny Moore, and it was the weaving, and then Aunty Laura Kirby creating the fish nets, and the fish nets are the stories that were thrown across the river, were swam across the river, and then the fish nets and the birds flew into the nets. It was always the tool of economics. Food is economics. And these fish nets that Aunty Laura Kirby made in Swan Hill, and her stories that I grew with, the weavings of Aunty M, creating out of the new resources like pine needles, and now her grandchildren are doing those same things, and the fish nets. So the story has carried through to now as art, installation of art. And you not see us as the deficit, but we were the contributors of the economics to this country, even to our colonisers. I think people need to understand their beginnings, to understand the history of place. I also have a connection with the early settlement, Collins. This is my journey, because Collins settled down there at Sorrento, but they couldn't find fresh water. But guess what? My ancestor from the Royal Marines sailed with him to Melbourne. And then when they couldn't find fresh water, which wasn't far down the road, they then transported to Tasmania. So the children on that boat are the same children who came back here. So Buckley was on that, but so was Faulkner was a young boy, and Batman, they were young. They came that full circle back. So it's waterways again. So it is the history of Melbourne. It's the history of impacts of colonisation, but it's also the history of the economics of this country, the waters. It's about seeing that we dined really well. Middens tell us what we ate. The water is the storyboard of life. The food that we gathered, the weavings to be able to create the traps that are connected to the course of people's lives, the trade, using technology to even smoke it, which has been a new thing for Australia, to smoke food now. It's important that we can talk about what water is a part of, that we welcome you to that. But it's also, Bunjil taught us to always welcome guests, but he required us to ask all visitors to make a number of promises. One, not to harm the lands and waters, and not harm our children of Bunjil.
So my name's Aunty Di, senior elder for my family line, and my people are the Wurundjeri people, Wurundjeri Balak, which is a clan. We had 6 clans, we only have 1 left, so we're all related. We all come from Annie Borat, who is the sister of William Barak, so we're a very important family. And my family lived along the Boonwurrung, the Yarra River, just behind Flinders Street Station there, where actually there was a waterfall and that was changed when the boats came in. First fleet came up there. And also the mouth of the bay, that was all marshy land there, and the mouth of the bay is another waterfall. It's probably still there, but it's all underwater now. So things were very different. So from the Docklands area is all marshy ground. Over the years, with industries and people not taking care of the area, it's not just water, they need to take care of the ground beside it. That has made it dirty. But the waterways are very important to us because the land is our mother. So I consider the waterways to be the veins of our mother, very important, and you look after them. And today in contemporary ways, we do ceremony, women's ceremony at Badger Creek. We do our water ceremony at the beginning of each year. We also do women's ceremony, coming of age for women, and baby naming ceremonies along Badger Creek amongst the old trees from the mission. Naarm is Melbourne's name. That was our initiation grounds, the confluence of the Merri Creek and the Boonwurrung. So it's a very peaceful site there. The river's changed a bit. They changed the flow of the river. But we go down there and do water ceremony as well, and smoking ceremonies for women. I do a lot of women's business. And we always do it near the sacred waters, because water is important to everybody. But we honour the water, and we don't take it for granted. When you go down there, if you ever go down there, you can actually feel the spirits of the ancestors, and I can picture them. I can feel them that much that I can see them across the banks of the river. Further up along the Merri Creek, in the Coburg area, there was a lot of Wurundjeri planted there, and that was our main staple for our diet for the winter. My mother and grandmother always spoke of the Merri Creek and spoke of how there was a lot of animals around, a lot of bird life, a lot of ducks, and the fishing was very good. And they sat along the creek and did their women's business. They made feather flowers, they made bark paintings, which is not actually painting, it's just getting the bark from the tree and all different colours, and they make a landscape. I try to do water ceremony, which is about obeying the laws of Boonwurrung, which is not to harm the land or the waterways, not to harm any of Boonwurrung's children, and Boonwurrung's my creator, and he's depicted as an eagle, and he created the earth and men. The paley and the bat created women, and Wah the crow is our protector. So all of those are very important, and they were all along the creek and all along the riverbeds. And so if we don't look after that and honour that, like people don't honour the Boonwurrung, the Yarra, it's dirty. But we try to keep it clean and do as much as we can because it's our mother, it's part of our mother, and you always looked after your mother. You never neglected her, you always honoured her, and that's how we've been brought up. So that's why I do a lot of contemporary stuff, and it's based on tradition. But what you do now is part of our history because we're a living history. We haven't gone away, so we continue doing that. And we teach the younger ones about that. And we teach them about not only their land and where they belong, about the water and about the fish and about the seasons. Because there's rocks along the Yarra that are placed so that when the river flows, it catches the fish, it stops the fish, and particularly eels. There was eel traps along there as well, and well known for catching the eels. We haven't done that for a long time. We have to make sure that the river is healthy for the fish and for all the wildlife and for all the little species that are in that. That's all your ecosystem. And if that's not healthy, then things don't work. I worry about our future. I worry about there being no water. I worry about what it's going to be like in the future for our future generations. So if we don't teach them to teach others, then we're going to struggle in life. So I hope that people will start to listen so our future isn't dust. That'd be very sad. And I've seen the rivers go down and down and down. And I've seen the creeks dry out. I've seen that, and I've seen actual rivers disappear in my life. And it's sad. So I hope that people understand that historically this river is very important to First Nations peoples and always will be. And we need to share between each other and look after it. It's important you belong, because if you don't belong, you can't connect to the country. You don't connect to the country, you lose your identity.